everyone. I hope you had a good break. Welcome to my session. My name is Anca Copescu. I'm the founder and CEO of Strategic and Pharma, and we are the developers of Clinical Maestro, which is the industry's first platform that attempts to modernize all aspects of clinical business operations. So I'm going to start by testing that the pointer works. Hold on. And it doesn't. How do I move? I know, I'm on it. Where do I am supposed to point? Sorry, guys. Not moving. A little bit of patience with me here. Okay, here you go. So it's a harder press on the green button. Okay. So I want to start by giving you a little bit of perspective of the two major dimensions of running clinical trials. On one hand, of course, you have the clinical operations side, and these are all activities associated with the setup, the execution, and the ending of the trial, setting activities related to operational aspects of running a trial. And equally important, about 15% on average of a cost of a trial goes towards clinical business operations. And this is a term that it's used differently by different companies, but you can think about all of the aspects encompassing planning clinical trials, budgeting for them, ensuring that you have the right partners at the table during your outsourcing process, be it tactical transactions or enabling your strategic partners to bid on specific trials. Further, looking at aspects related to vendor oversight and performance management, and of course, the ongoing monitoring of a clinical trial from a business perspective, which means dealing with an average of 5+ change orders per clinical trial. So there are lots of pain points, and as I look at this picture right here, although you might not have a mountain of paper behind you, the questions that the person is asking are very common, and I have experienced them myself heading clinical outsourcing at BioMarin Pharmaceuticals for a number of years. The generic systems don't work well in clinical procurement. And we know why, because they are not fit for purpose, because they cannot accommodate the complexity of clinical trials, the thousands of assumptions that go into a trial, and the ongoing management of the change orders associated with a trial. We also know that typically the analytics are missing when you are sourcing in Excel, which is quite natural. You know, you've all seen RFPs, or you've bid on proposals coming from the sponsors, and you all know they have an average 10+ tabs, thousands of lines, especially if you are looking at a CRO RFP. And all the data, which is extremely valuable. It's data related to the cost, to the timeline, to the regulatory and outsourcing strategy of a particular trial. It all resides into some kind of an Excel spreadsheet, and it goes into a SharePoint, and the data gets never analyzed. And questions which are universal across most industries, such as plan versus budget, are rarely answered in clinical trials. And it's amazing how very few times sponsors do go back and say, what did we plan for this trial when we started it, and where did we end up years later at the end of multiple contracts with, again, multiple change orders? And there is really a high cost of doing nothing. First of all, is a question of scalability. As you are starting wherever you are, maybe in your journey, whether it's a biotech growing into having multiple trials and multiple assets, or a pharma managing a multitude of assets in their portfolio. When you're doing all the work in Excel, scalability is a challenge. I will tell you, when I was managing at BioMarin on 40 trials, I had 17 people, and my boss would not give me another person for the love of God. So there is a limitation on the capacity of managing and driving analytics and conducting really good due diligence during contract management when you are limited to very basic tools such as Excel. But more importantly, when you are dealing with Excel, there is a very poor understanding of the relationship between cost drivers, which are assumptions, and the outcomes of the trial, which are related to timelines, are related to the cost of the trial, and decisions related to outsourcing strategy. Then, of course, when you are, again, using antiquated technology to manage sourcing processes, you end up with almost no analytics. I spoke before about the infrequency of doing comprehensive analytics back in time to what was planned versus where you end up at the end of a trial. So what we are trying to do with Clinical Maestro, the journey that we set on, is to develop a modular platform that addresses the specific pain points of managing all the business aspects of running clinical trials. Starting with, I wish I knew what the pointer is, but here it is. Okay, so starting with our first product, Portfolio, we launched it in 2018. Portfolio is a planning tool that enables sponsors to run any number of scenarios, what-if scenarios, related to the execution of a trial. It gives an outcome of timelines, outsourcing strategy, cost, and it embeds the regulatory strategy as well. Further, after you plan, the natural thing is to source. Source is built-in procurement technology for pharma. We launched a product late 2018. We had quite a boom during COVID. Almost $5 billion worth of bids went through our solution, pretty much by all major service providers. It really is an antidote to generic solutions because it is built for purpose for running clinical trials with the specific assumptions associated with running trials. LEAD is a product that was launched just last year. LEAD came from our sponsors using our source application, going all the way from RFP to contract, and they came to us and asked us, so what? Now we are in contract, we need to manage the study or the contract throughout the life cycle of the contract, and particularly we focused on managing out of scope and replacing the traditional CNF process, which is typically managed by different CROs or vendors, and enabling it, the technology to track it as opposed to an Excel. And finally, just this September, we launched Vision. Vision is a governance tool and a performance management tool specifically geared towards managing clinical service providers. So I will try to give you a little sneak peek of all of the applications, starting with Portfolio. I'm going to go relatively fast so you can get a high-level overview and taste. First of all, why portfolio planning? I keep asking this question when we speak to pharma companies that do very little portfolio planning, and I always wonder why, because I was managing outsourcing myself, and portfolio planning is mission critical. What has happened over time because of the lack of planning tools, the planning is pretty much left to the strategic partners or the CROs, but there are so many key use cases for planning. Not only planning at the study level, but being able to look at multiple studies rolling into a program, and being able to evaluate multiple programs running into a portfolio, and doing the what-if scenarios, which were critical, for example, during COVID, in a way that does not take months, but it takes minutes. And other use cases, of course, are the evaluation of the R&D pipeline, asset valuation, management, or negotiations related to R&D partnerships. All of these activities related to clinical trial planning, while they are primarily delegated to strategic partners, they are critical for the pharma company itself. Not to say that it's very important either as a CRO or as a pharma company to have a good understanding of the impact of resources on all of your ongoing, if all of the planned trials are starting. So unfortunately, as I spoke before, most of the activities are done in Excel or by tools which are quite antiquated. And if you look at the statistics, there is quite a high variance, as high as 20%, that the companies are reported in what they think a trial would cost and what it ends up costing. So looking at portfolio, it has several major use cases. First, ballpark modeling. We take as little as 8 assumptions to deliver an entire operational plan, which is about 90% accurate. Of course, if you want to do deeper modeling, typically before an outsourcing exercise, or if you are going through an asset valuation, that you may be looking at detailed modeling, and you can do it in a quite sophisticated way, particularly around adaptive trials and oncology, where we can model quite complex designs with multiple cohorts and quite complicated scale-up. We have advanced configuration in which you can set up your milestones, you can track your payment schedule, and at the end of the day, a tool is as valuable as it becomes yours. So we have a high level of configuration in your application that you can even take advantage of modeling with benchmark data, which we are collecting, but using your own structure of bit grid or structure of sourcing. So this is high-level sneak peek of modeling scenarios. Of course, you can click the compare button right here, and you can go into quite a high level of detail for patients, for sites, for regulatory assumptions, for locations, and of course, for cost. This is an example of a comparison at the patient level. Again, what you are doing is modeling and thinking about your strategy for a study that has not yet started. The outcome, it's quite impressive. We pride ourselves in accuracy, and the accuracy has to be taken in the context of having data that it's current. The data, it's coming from our own sourcing engine, and we use more than 1,000 proprietary algorithms to estimate, using activity-based costing principles, the effort and the cost associated with each unique activity associated with a clinical trial. We have sponsors that have claimed that they reduced the planning time from weeks to minutes. We really like to see that efficiency in terms of eliminating Excel-based spreadsheets. And of course, what we are paying most attention to is the increase of the oversight and the transparency with your service providers. So now a little tour of Source. Source is our R&D procurement application. As you know, $50 billion a year are being outsourced by pharma. We took a little sliver of that during COVID in terms of outsourcing volume, but you are talking about thousands and thousands of RFPs that are going out in a highly antiquated manner. More than that, oftentimes when we speak to large pharma, they say, well, we don't need sourcing technology because we have negotiated every little detail of our relationship with our partners. But I will say that every little detail oftentimes is the level of the MSA. It's very difficult sometimes, and strategic partnerships cannot be taken for granted, to really ensure that the rate cards that you negotiated are in fact applied to the specific study, that the effort or the fixed template that you negotiated is actually applied, that the inflation that, again, you negotiated is effectively and correctly applied to your study. So even if your bidding is entirely non-competitive, you need more than the human eyes and a side-by-side Excel analysis to ensure that what is in your contract is actually reflected in a bid. So another very important aspect is not only what we spoke about, that most of the work is done in Excel, but the lack of having a central database of all your bids. It's preventing you from doing analytics which are mission critical, particularly in sourcing. There is so much information that can be gathered at the contract level. Again, let alone the outsourcing strategy and the RACI, which is very important in terms of tracking who's doing what on a trial. But equally important is looking at the various aspects and various assumptions, for example, enrollment rates or accrual rates or site activation timelines, which are the assumptions that the CRO has made at the onset of the trial and which must constitute the basis for performance tracking down the road. So a little bit about source. I'll try to use the pointer again here. Sourcing is all about category management. It can be used across all the service categories. We've done mostly services, but now we are moving into tech. It's about doing due diligence very easily at the push of a button. It's about having central intelligence and being able not only to understand the analytics of the trial level, but understand the analytics of your outsourcing team. And I remember very well when I was at BioMarine, we used to have these monthly meetings in which we pulled up the tracker just to see which RFP was going out when, what is the status, when is the bid defense. Sometimes, because of the lack of coordination, there were 2 meetings in the same day, sometimes being in conflict. It's very important not only to assess the savings that you are achieving with your outsourcing team, but also to have a balanced approach in terms of their workload. This, of course, requires understanding at a granular level what everybody is doing and using technology to better track that. Finally, we spoke about the analytics. Analytics are very important because you are looking at specific metrics of that are universal, and the CROs have been doing it for a long time. So, you know, how much should, what is the cost of doing, entering data for, I don't know, for CRFs? What is the average cost of site activation? All of these elements are really important because they are setting the target and the comparison across multiple studies, and you can achieve that by having the data in a central database. So these are some examples of the companies that have worked with us, both on the CRO side, as bidder in our solutions, and sponsors using our sourcing technology. This is just a high-level sneak peek of how an RFP database would look like, in which you understand what RFPs are out, what is their status, who's working on them, for what services you are sourcing. Of course, very important when you are talking about clinical trial sourcing is having multiple bidding modalities. And we have quite a few. A bid to specification is a mode in which you are not allowing your vendors to change any kind of assumptions, as opposed to bid to expertise, which is often employed by smaller biotechs, and actually not only, in order to allow the partner to bid to their expertise on a particular therapeutic area. And oftentimes, both modalities are used, especially when you are doing a price squeezing strategy. And of course, there are many ways in which you want the bid to come back. You may want just to know the unit cost. You might want to know how many hours are being spent. And you might want to go as granular as understanding which resources are performing a certain activity and what is the breakdown down to the rate card. And this is specific to big pharma sourcing. As the bids come back, very easy to analyze them. You have multiple rebidding modes, so you can start with bid 1, as you can see in this example, and then you can have a rebid of the bid 1, a rebid of another bid. You are going in a dynamic fashion. In this case, is an example of multiple service providers, 3. This can, of course, be done with a single service provider as well. The important thing is the ability to trace the differences between vendors and for the same vendor across different bidding experiences. Most importantly, with the integration with portfolio, you can bring that compared to RFP feature, which is going to bring the benchmark live into the bidding exercise. Similarly, you can trace your RACI and all of the changes of the RACI, which is the responsibilities between the sponsor and the service provider, not only through the initial RFP, but through all the cycles of the subsequent change orders. When a bid comes back, there's nothing more important than knowing what has changed. And this is an example of a bid to expertise in which The outsourcing manager can clearly see the differences between what they've asked and what the CRO proposed. And this is an example in which they eliminated France and added UK. Again, that traceability, it's worth a lot of the due diligence time of the outsourcing manager. Of course, you want to see variances, and you can filter the level of variance based on your tolerance where you want to focus your examination. And when it comes to a change order, equally important is to be able to see the change order coming through the system. The ability to track variances between the original contract and the change order is mission critical, and you can do that at a very granular level down to the minor task activities, which I'm not showing in today's meeting. Finally, we have developed the first dynamic mapping technology in the industry, and this feature is available both for CROs and for sponsors. This means that you can create your own bid grid in the system and map it to Clinical Maestro, which is very dynamic. That means you can preserve the benchmark during the bidding during the bidding experience, but you can actually do the same thing with the preferred CRO. So you can map the preferred CRO to Clinical Maestro, to the sponsor bid grid, and have that beautiful tunnel view if the CRO is capable of bidding in their native bid grid, not in the sponsor bid grid. That is an enormous time saver for the CRO. However, the system will automatically convert to, let's say, the GSK template, and then you would be able to still see how each activity maps in a way that takes away the mystery and the mistakes associated with mapping. Again, because we have a solution for CRO pricing, this technology applies to the CROs and hopefully alleviates the pain of having mappers, which we all know the CROs have quite large team of mappers trying to match the sponsor preferences. If you're using fixed cost templates, you can enforce the fixed cost negotiated templates during the bidding exercise. So you can really see if what you agreed, for example, 190 hours, is what the CRO or the partner actually bid during the exercise. The outcome of all of these, it's at least 10% savings during the due diligence, which is quite significant because we are talking about bids that on average coming to our platforms are 10 million and above. Of course, manual effort is drastically reduced, and we like to see the sourcing managers move away from Excel and playing with a beautiful tool like Clinical Maestro. And of course, you are looking at reducing the study startup time by reducing the subsequent activities associated with due diligence. Very briefly, I won't have much time for LEAD other than say that LEAD is the first solution to really enable the out-of-scope tracking after you have an awarded contract. It allows managing earned value analysis, which is a key component in tracking activities on clinical trials by supporting any service provider, not only the CRO, to submit activities completely directly in the system. So we know this is all a word of Excel. We also know that multiple stakeholders from clinical operations, project managers, and finance are dying to know what's happening on a trial, and they don't want to find that out at the governance meeting. They want to know dynamically throughout the course of the trial which activities are completed and what is the forecasted timeline for activities that have not been completed. So here is a high-level example of a chart that you would easily see in LEAD. This is an example of a contract of 5.6 million. In a snapshot, you already spent 740,000. You can see what the value of the expected value of the contract would be by comparing contract with an ongoing baseline. And finally, you can break this down by service category, and that enables you to keep a real pulse on the activities on any given trial. This is an example of a forecast, and this is a screenshot which I really like because this is an example of how an out-of-scope tracker can be entirely moved away from Excel to a system. So this is an example in which the service provider is proposing the sponsor a change. The change is very clearly delineated. So for example, the kickoff meeting is going to cost hypothetically $1,000 more. Why is that happening? And then you have a justification workflow, and then you have, as a sponsor, a way to accept or reject the change. And if it's integrated, technically the vendor could actually already invoice on it. The outcome, it's visibility. It's visibility, control over the entire forecasting process and monitoring actual activities completed on a trial. And I'm not talking only about the units, I'm also talking about milestones accomplished. And I'm also talking about resource utilization as per your agreements. So finally, our latest project, Vision. Vision is a tool for category managers. It's meant to be a central hub of information and to connect to all of your systems that touch in different shapes or form the vendor. For example, if you have a qualification system in place, we can connect to it. If not, you can do qualification directly in Clinical Maestro. If you have a contract system like Ariba or alike, that in which you keep the contract, we can pull information about the contract into Vision, or you can use Vision as a primary source of information for contract tracking. The point is that category management, our category managers can find all the information at their fingertips without having to log in multiple systems, and not to say because naturally the systems do not connect, you end up with Excel tracker. So very quickly, this is a dashboard of vendor category manager in which you can easily identify your service providers in your portfolio. You may want to know how many CROs do I have in oncology that can run trials in Turkey. So that filtering is narrowing down the list. And you can search by a multitude of dimensions in your portfolio. Most importantly, the vendors have the exact same visibility on their own record, and because of the role-based access, they can maintain the record accordingly. So this is another example in which you can track not only all your main providers, the data can be pulled from a contract management system, but you can track all of your subcontractors, for example, of the CRO on any given trial, and the specific services they are providing, and the amounts for which they've been contracted. In fact, we have the concept of provider and sub-provider at the category level. So you might maybe contract a provider central lab directly on one study, and it could be subcontracted by the CRO on a different study. You would still have the visibility of all the work that the vendor is performing on that study. Finally, governance has to be easy. There's got to be a place where you can keep the minutes of your governance meetings, of your QBRs, where you can track all your metrics, where you have a dynamic calendar of your upcoming governance events. We actually enable the service providers, if your process is for the service provider to keep the minutes from the governance meeting, they can go in and log them directly in Vision. And here is a sneak peek into what's coming in terms of performance management. We are working with a number of sponsors to create dynamic metrics reporting, which we are targeting to release middle of next year. Again, what you are looking for is more visibility, better oversight, less audit findings, hopefully related to the lack of oversight, and less manual effort. So with this, with Clinical Maestro, what we are attempting to do is cover all the pillars of outsourcing management, and that is planning with our portfolio tool, sourcing and R&D procurement with our source tool, managing with lead, and overseeing with Vision. The outcome is harmony in delivery. We want all stakeholders to be working off the same platform. We want to enable information based on their roles, create dashboards that are specific to their specific mission in the company, and everybody benefiting from speed and accuracy and reliability of data. So with this, I invite you to booth 36 if you want to see a live demo, and thank you so much for staying with me. Any questions? Go ahead.
Hi, thanks a lot. This is very, very interesting. For your first tool, sorry, I forgot the name of it, the planning one.
Portfolio.
Where is your data coming from, and how do you ensure the diversity of data is, it's kind of like the whole, the quality of the data out depends on how good the data in was.
Yeah, we get asked this question all the time. We are collecting the data from our sourcing engine. We have a mechanism of blinding it, and we are using our own algorithms, pretty much like a CRO would do, activity-based costing, to apply benchmark rate cards and benchmark levels of effort for any activity. So we are not going back and looking at what's the average cost for project management for a phase 1 oncology trial, for example. We are breaking down activities related to project management. We are looking at who's doing those activities, whether it's a global project manager, an assistant, whomever, a scheduler. We are breaking that down to the level of effort, exactly the same way as a CRO would do. In fact, this is a CRO costing tool in the hands of a sponsor. The difference is that we are collecting benchmark rates through our sourcing platform, and we are updating it about every 6 months. The accuracy has been consistently above 95%.
Do I understand well that you're saying we take it from sourcing, so you're using your second tool on sourcing with actual data?
Yes.
So from sponsors and CROs, and then you give that to other sponsors, you just anonymize it?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I think I'm past my time. Okay. I am past my time. Thank you so much.